Less than a year after Unified Command finally made an arrest in the Delphi murders, Jerry Holeman was deposed. On August 10th, 2023, Holeman testified that there was no physical or digital evidence linking Richard Allen to the crime scene or the victims. No data extracted from his phone connected him to the murders. No data extracted from Libby's phone connected him to the murders. No evidence connected Richard Allen to any other suspects in the case. No evidence found on social media connected him to the murders. No evidence extracted from his computers connected him to the murders. And no fingerprint evidence connected him to the murders. Holeman also testified that early in the investigation, one of the investigators viewing the crime scene thought it might be the work of Odinists. Holeman said that based upon the thought that Odinism may explain how the bodies were found and how the sticks were arranged on top of the girls, Unified Command sought out an expert in order to consider whether the crime scene was indicative of Odinism or some other cult. Holeman stated that he'd forgotten which investigator it was that thought it might be the work of Odinists, but that Sergeant Steve Buckley of the Indiana State Police was in charge of locating an expert, and the expert Buckley found was from Purdue University. According to Holeman, the professor was out of the country at the time, and law enforcement didn't want to release the photos, so they sent a sketch of the sticks depicting how they were laid and some other information. Holeman said the Purdue professor studies Norwegian Nordic culture, but that Buckley was the one in communication with him about it. Holeman confirmed that he never spoke to or with the Purdue professor himself, but that the professor said the sticks found on the girls did not represent Odinism or any type of cult worshipping or any type of group that would have conducted the crime. During his deposition, Holeman was also asked about Dan Doolin. When asked if Doolin made any mistakes in the report he drafted following his interview with Mr. Allen, Holeman answered, "There was an error. I don't know if it was processing or whatever you want to call it, but at some point, it got lost in the shuffle and entered incorrectly." Every news report I ever found about how that tip got lost in the shuffle or entered incorrectly, or whatever you want to call it, led back to the Murder Sheet podcasters and an unnamed investigative source telling tales of a clerical error, which the FBI promptly and publicly called bullshit on. Holeman was also shown images gathered by detectives Greg Ferenczi, Kevin Murphy, and Todd Click during their investigation. When Holeman was asked if there were any notable similarities between the photos, Holeman pretended not to see any of note. When Holeman was shown Betsy Blair and Sarah Carbaugh sketches, Holeman was adamant that there were only minor differences, and he insisted both sketches of the two different men were the same man. Holeman then enlightened the defense that Indiana State Police Superintendent Doug Carter kicked the FBI off the Delphi case around 2021 over what he called some conflicts, which is certainly the strangest way I've heard any member of law enforcement describe Greg Ferenczi's death. And despite Ferenczi's investigation into Brad Holder as a suspect, Holeman testified that Brad Holder was not ever really considered a suspect by law enforcement. After Holeman's deposition, it appears a search began for the Purdue professor because on August 12th, the Purdue police contacted Holeman to confirm that they identified the Purdue professor as Dr. Jeffrey Turco. On August 14th, Holeman told Prosecutor McClellan that he possibly identified the professor, and the prosecutor told Holeman to go meet with the professor so that the state could confirm he was the one who wrote the report for Unified Command in 2017. Because Holeman told the prosecutor that he only possibly identified the unnamed professor, when in fact, the Purdue police confirmed his identity as Dr. Jeffrey Turco, Holeman obviously had to then contact Professor Turco to faux inquire if he was the professor law enforcement asked to assist them with their investigation 6 years earlier. Holeman took possession of the Purdue report, but it's unclear if Turco provided Holeman with a copy of it or if Holeman had it the whole time. On September 6th, defense contacted Nick McClelland to remind the prosecutor They still need the name of that Purdue professor, as they still needed to depose him in preparation for trial. And as shit you not, the prosecutor told defense, as stated before, we are trying to identify the Purdue professor, but no luck yet. Detective Holeman has reached out to the FBI in Purdue and has not gotten a response yet. We will continue our endeavors, but may not be able to find him/her. On September 18th, Richard Allen's defense team filed a motion for a Franks hearing. Within the Franks motion was references to the missing Purdue professor the state had been lying about for the last month to obstruct defense from deposing in preparation for trial. One day later, on September 19th, Holeman sat down for that meeting the prosecutor asked him to take care of a month earlier. At the beginning of the interview, Holeman apologized to Professor Turco for the 3 to 4 weeks it took him to sit down and talk. On September 22nd, Holeman memorialized his interview with Dr. Jeffrey Turco, and the audio from that interview was turned over in a discovery notice on September 27th, except the audio was turned over without the related narrative report Holeman prepared, and also without the report Turco wrote in 2017. So the audio file was just labeled Jeffrey Turco, with no indication that it had anything to do with the Purdue report or the Purdue professor, and the state turned it over knowing the professor's name was never actually provided to defense, so the prosecutor was well aware defense had no reason to know an audio file labeled with a random man's name that wasn't accompanied by a narrative report that accompanies all interviews was the Purdue professor. Fortunately, this wasn't defense's first rodeo, because on October 3rd, defense filed an additional Franks notice to incorporate the actual words spoken by Dr. Jeffrey Turco during his September 19th interview, and on October 4th, defense emailed McClellan to ask, again, for the state to please turn over the report Turco wrote in 2017, and the prosecutor finally did turn over that report, but still had the audacity to withhold the related narrative report Holeman prepared on the 22nd, following his interview with Turco, presumably because competent defense attorneys would raise obvious issues pertaining to what exactly led Unified Command to go from looking into an Odinist angle in the earliest stages of the investigation to abruptly, but unequivocally, dismissing it. By the end of the day, all hell had broken loose because of a so-called leak the prosecutor accused the defense of orchestrating. The prosecutor began talking to the special judge about disqualifying the defense for allowing such a breach of security to happen. However, another thing the state was being cute about was knowledge of the breach as early as August, when defense's war room was full of discovery and had been uniquely organized for depositions with law enforcement. You'd think the prosecutor would take immediate steps to have that room secured if and when he learned a room full of protected discovery had been leaked. But you'd be wrong, because the state chose to use it to their advantage instead. They didn't bring it to the court's attention until one of their leaker spies decided to go from sending defense work product and strategy to the prosecutor to mass email and crime scene pictures to podcasters and YouTubers.